Hi everyone, this is Janice from Le Rue de Fleurs. Today I'm going to walk you through the Summer Seeds quilt. It's rather large and I'll give you the measurements at the end. Here's my rough sketch. It kind of involved a seed pod panel on one side using Tula Pink freefall fabrics and some bright colored triangles on the opposite side. The inspiration is from Jen Hewitt's print pattern Sew and one of her designs in that book. I'll link that below. Here's a whole bunch of the triangles that I've cut from different fabrics, and I'll link a ruler that helps you cut those below, as well as a great tutorial to show you a little bit more in depth about construction of triangle quilts. Whenever I'm making my quilts in this fashion, the randomness is not actually very random. I take a lot of time to plan it out so that the colors and values are scattered across the quilt in a pleasing manner. That adds a little bit of balance. For this one, I tried to keep a lot of white space too in the solid colors and in the white and cream fabrics. And then it's just folding them over and sewing them all together. For the triangles, you want to offset the corners a little bit on your first ones, and that gives you that nice 1/4 inch seam at the top and bottom so you don't bury your points at the end. Again, the tutorial that I'll link below probably goes over that in a lot more detail for you. But you can see here's the first set attached, and then when you get ready to do the next bit, you'll actually line them up tip to tip, and that will continue to link the chain and allow that 1/4 inch seam at the top and bottom of your triangles so you don't bury your points near the end. And then when I get to the end, I'm just using a little half triangle and adding that on the end so I don't have to cut as much off of my quilt. I try to reduce waste where possible. And then I would alternate pressing. So one row I would go one direction and then I would go the opposite in the direction for the next time, and that just reduces bulk when you're sewing this next bit of seams. Here's where I do try to pin to line up the points of my triangles. And you won't maybe necessarily get them all exact, but it definitely helps with shifting when you go to sew the rows together. And then we're just going to sew it all up, take the pins out. You can see here how the points sit just below that 1/4 inch seam really nicely, so you get that nice crisp point, which is what we're going for with these quilts. But some of them will not line up perfectly or be a little bit, have the tops cut off. And you know what? It's fine. Nobody's really going to notice that in a huge panel. And then I press this whole thing opened and make it nice and crisp. Kind of as you go, I like to press in small sections. And then I lay it out and just kind of keep going down until I make the whole large triangle panel that is going to fill up the left side of my quilt. I really wish I sewed this fast in real life. And I really like the colors of this quilt. It's bright and fun and happy, and that circular print with all the colors there was really my jumping off point for the color palette. So I used that to match up a lot of the other prints. And I brought in a vine because I was dealing with the seed pod theme as well. And there ended up being 14 to 15 rows down. I can't remember exactly which to make this quilt there. And then I'm on to the seed pod panel side. So I'm kind of just measuring here. I didn't get it quite exact with the triangles, just I used 5.5 inch triangles and they didn't quite reach the full length of the freefall panel, but that's okay. I just trimmed that up a little bit at the end. It's good to have a little wiggle room. To trim my quilt, I just line up along the edge with the piece that hangs over the least and use my ruler to line up with all of my seams to get a nice straight edge on that, so it makes it easier to put together later. You want to keep things nice and neat. I had a very large piece of this free fall because it was a wide back from Tula Pink, so I had to cut that top layer off that I wanted to use, and I still have a really large piece to use later. Then whenever I went to lay out my pattern, I realized I wanted the seed pod to interact a little bit more with the triangle side, so I used a little bit of extra brown paper to extend my pattern and make the seed pod a little bit more impactful and also give a little bit more length to the pods so they could overlap into the triangles. Here I'm just testing colors, but I liked the first thing I picked, which usually happens. And then I'm in my scrap bin for all the bits that I'm going to add for my reverse applique. And just tracing my pattern onto the gray Kona, it's titanium, and I'm just going to cut those out. And I did those in pieces so that I could maximize the use of my fabric, because I knew I was going to lay them together in smaller pieces on top and just neaten up any curves as I go. And then I'm using all of these solid colors in just like various strips, and I kind of had a little bit of a marking on my template that I transferred to my seed pod of where I wanted to create the reverse applique look, but in the end I probably would have skipped that step. I didn't really use it as much, and then I just had to erase like pencil lines off of the top part of my quilt, which was not really fun. So I just layered a bunch of different colors throughout that were represented on the triangle side, and then I used my machine to top stitch that all in place. And with this I'm just kind of creating crescent shapes, little wonky crescents with a bunch of lines that I could cut through. In retrospect, I probably would have created my crescents even larger and wider spaces between the lines so I could cut out a little bit more and there would be more depth in my reverse applique, but it worked out fine. And then it's using some tiny, really tiny, sharp embroidery scissors here to poke a hole through the first layer of fabric. And this part you want to be really, really careful so that you don't go down too deep, and just cut away one at a time, leaving just a little bit around your stitches that will hold your fabric in place. And then I'm just snipping down through the different layers and checking to make sure that I have fabric behind where I'm cutting. Because I did that a little haphazardly. I didn't need it in all the spots, so I'm just checking as I cut down through 3 layers that I do indeed have 3 layers of fabric to cut down too. And I used the Angela Walters reverse applique tutorial videos that I will link down below for you if you want some more information and a little bit more detail on the philosophy behind some of that and her techniques as well. She explains it really, really well. She does it on a much larger quilt, but and then I am using my glue to stick my applique in place. I find this to be a little bit easier than pins on these odd shaped pieces and this really large panel. Instead of poking myself with 1,000 pins, I'll just glue it and then let it dry overnight, and then I will stitch it all in place and just smooth it out and make sure everything's lined up where I want it. And I lost the footage of me sewing it together, but there you can see the reverse applique gets that nice frayed texture around it and really highlights all of that interesting work there. And then I zigzag stitched down each layer of my pod, connecting everything to the base layer, and there you have it. It's overlapping slightly onto the triangle panel. I love how the swallows peek out from behind, and it's really nice and a bold contrast with it's a little bit more subtle than the triangle side, obviously with the more colors, but I like how the bold colors behind the seed pods really connect both of them, and it's an interesting statement on both sides of the quilt. And it really gives me that summer vibe, for summer garden vibe, which I really like so much. I love zinnias, and this has a lot of those really bright orange and pink and golden tones. And it turned out to be a rather massive quilt. It is 70 inches wide by 78 inches long. So it's a really large throw, almost a twin size. I added a piece of the Tula pink to the top and bottom and some additional triangles just to kind of bring the sides together a little bit more at the end. So thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe for more. Have a great day.